Hello, everybody. Welcome. Jesse, hello.
Hello.
Wow, this is so cool. I'm so excited to have you here. I've been talking about what TheraHive can do to my audience for like a cool minute now. And they are familiar with DBT, but before we even do introductions, can we do a mindfulness exercise just to get us set up for success?
When would I ever turn down the opportunity to do a mindfulness exercise? Yes, let's do it.
Okay, everybody, you're
Um,
welcome to join everybody. If not, just stick around. We'll get right into the topic after this, but Jesse, as you can explain, this is such a great way to get us ready.
yeah, I mean, the beauty of mindfulness is that we can't really change behaviors that we're not aware of. And it's also a great way, I'm sure I can speak, well, I'll speak for myself. I've had a lot going on today. There's probably a lot that's going to happen today. And so when we practice mindfulness, it's a really wonderful opportunity to bring our attention to just this very moment. So I'm going to take us back to basics here. And we are going to practice a mindfulness where we're just drawing our attention to the breath. So I invite anyone who is listening to either close their eyes or lower their gaze. And let's just start here, just taking an inhale through the nose and a slow, long exhale through the mouth. We'll do that one more time. Inhaling through the nose. And a slow, long exhale through the mouth. And now allow your breath to find its natural rhythm. Inhaling and exhaling. And allow your attention to rest on that inhale and exhale. Now, for some folks, they might find this point of concentration, maybe it's the tickle in the upper lip, maybe it's the expansion and contraction of the diaphragm, the air in the back of the throat. Wherever you notice the breath most strongly, allow your attention to simply rest there. And because this is a brief mindfulness practice, whenever you're ready, you may open your eyes, bring your attention to the Instagram, and let's party.
Awesome. Oh, thanks, Jesse. I need that as well. It's been a little bit of a hectic morning, so great to be grounded. Well, first of all, who the heck are you? And why are we talking about DBT with you? What is your experience?
These are great questions, ones that I'm often wrestling with myself. So my name is Jesse. My pronouns are he, him. I am a clinical psychologist and DBT therapist. Why are we talking, and also co-founder of TheraHive. Why are we talking, who am I? Okay, that's kind of partly who I am. And why are we talking to me? I am passionate about all things DBT, and I'm happy to explain why at some point. And I also work with folks who are suffering or experiencing emotion dysregulation within the DBT framework.
Mm-hmm.
And that could also look like folks who are experiencing trauma or resistant treatment depression or all sorts of things in which DBT has shown itself effective for helping.
I love that. And then you mentioned TheraHive because that is a part of who you are. What is TheraHive for people who are new here, who are just tuning in?
Wonderful question. So TheraHive is an online platform and community where we offer evidence-based skills training
Mm-hmm.
and group coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, our current focus is on DBT.
Mm-hmm.
So we offer the full 4 modules of DBT skills.
Yeah.
And it's fun because it's what we call asynchronous. That's fancy tech terminology that I learned, which essentially means that you learn the skills through our online platform. And then once a week, you meet up with a group and
Mm-hmm.
you discuss how you've implemented those skills over the past week.
Yeah. Wow. And what makes it different from comprehensive DBT? And then what maybe are the advantages for people who don't know the difference?
Love that question. So when we think of comprehensive DBT, there are sort of four components that make it quote unquote comprehensive. First is individual therapy. Second is skills group.
Mm-hmm.
Third is phone coaching. And then
Mm-hmm.
fourth is what we call consultation team, which is essentially, what we think of as like therapy for the therapist.
Yeah.
That's like the comprehensive model. There are many ways in which that has sort of broken out. You might go to a DBT informed therapist. You can maybe go to a skills only group. We are a bit more within the skills only group model. What makes us different is that the skills learning part takes place entirely at your own pace and speed and time. And then you have the once a week where you begin to reflect on your practice of those skills. The advantages, I think, is that one, we can ensure that the skills you're learning are adherent to the manual. You're not necessarily getting, different spins on things in a way that's inadherent. Two, I think that this, our big goal in creating TheraHive was to make things approachable.
Yeah.
It sometimes learning these skills can feel, it's a lot. We're talking about emotions. We're talking about painful things, and it can feel really overwhelming. And the more approachable and fun, even entertaining we can make it, the better.
Yeah.
I think one of the things about, psychologists are really great at creating interventions. We're not really great at making them things that people actually want to use and play with.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other thing is it's, we want to make it accessible. We offer a range of pricing for folks. And our big goal is to make DBT as accessible to as many people as possible, because it's changed my life. It's changed the lives of many of the folks that I work with. And we believe most folks
that's how
benefit.
Yes, that's how our paths crossed. Was I fully believe in making it as accessible as possible. It is an incredible intervention. It also suffers from the same pitfalls that other mental health interventions do, which is access and cost. And some of the best clinics that I'm aware of still have wait lists, and that's for a wait list for something that most people can't afford. So what I love about the TheraHive ethos is that the self-paced is for people who have the space for the autonomy. So you'll know right from the get-go if that's good for you. And then if it's not, what I love about TheraHive is the group aspect of it. And I didn't hear you mention this, but I just want to add, the individual is an option for extra support. I just had my first individual session with a student, and it was awesome. It was epic. And I fully believe in the skills as well. We are specifically talking today about life worth living goals. And why, when someone says life worth living goals, what is that related? What about DBT is related to life worth living? And why, when we're talking about life, why do we have to have goals that make it worth living?
Oh, these are important questions. Okay, I think there's a number of ways that we can approach this. I have the urge to bring it back to the dialectic a little bit.
Please.
So when we think about the dialectic, the fundamental dialectic in DBT, it is between acceptance and change. We're always playing between these poles. And oftentimes in DBT, it's framed as you're doing the best that you can, and you need to do better, work harder, etc. And that both these things are true.
Yeah.
Now, when we think about change, and we think about this idea of what's effective, what we are thinking about are our goals. What is effective is not what someone else decides is effective. It's not what society determines is effective. In DBT, we don't wrestle with what is good, quote unquote, or what is bad, quote unquote.
Yeah.
We determine efficacy by the question, is this helping you move towards what's important to you?
Yeah.
And so life worth living goals is really the thing that we use to orient ourselves when we're engaging in a change practice. And to some extent, when we're engaging in acceptance practices as well. When we're asking ourselves, is this behavior that I'm participating in, quote unquote, skillful, or effective.
Mm. Why is it important to differentiate between like effective, which is an observation, and good or bad, which would be a judgment?
So I love this question. For a whole host of reasons. One, good or bad, I'm going to say this from a couple different perspectives. I think one, the thing that we know is that when we begin to rely on judgments to sort of assess our own behavior or the behaviors of others, it tends to increase or intensify dysregulation. So, for instance, if I have the thought, I'm a bad therapist, that's just going to make me feel crappy. And there's not much I can do about bad. It almost is like it forecloses curiosity, because now all I'm left with is just, I'm a bad therapist. Now, if we use our observe and describe skills, and I can observe and describe what behaviors are quote unquote ineffective, meaning are not helping me move towards my goals, then instead of seeing this as something inherent in me, I can look at it as a skills deficit. What ways do I need to work on in order to become more effective? So I think the benefit of seeing or asking ourselves the question of what's effective versus what's good is that, one, it's really an internal question. We're not using someone else's standards to define what's important to us. So it's what's inherent to us. Two, it doesn't carry sort of the attendant potential for feelings of shame or resentment.
And what about shame and resentment helps us or inhibits us from getting to those life worth living goals?
I have found, and it's interesting, there's this really, and I want to sort of say here that I think in some ways I may be a bit undialectical. So I'm really open to what I'm missing here. For the most part, when I work with folks, I find that shame, and really the shame thought, is often unhelpful. In that shame is often accompanied by the thought that I am intrinsically bad, broken, quote unquote, like ill or crazy, defective. And I want to highlight that's different than guilt. When we think about guilt, that is the thought, oh, I am unhappy with that behavior that I engaged in, versus I am bad. And so to your question, why is shame unhelpful in it helping us achieve our goals, is that if we believe that we're inherently bad, then again, it forecloses curiosity about how we can change. And two, it sort of lands us in hopelessness. What's the point of change if I'm just broken?
Wow. That sounded almost like a thought, like the life worth living goals sound like a great antidote to thought stopping.
Yes.
Right. So getting to a point where you're judging and moralizing yourself to where you don't move past it. It sounds like that would be a huge inhibitor of getting to your life worth living goals.
A huge inhibitor. I think this is the part about shame where, so what I was mentioning earlier, the author Zadie Smith, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, was sort of had a video talking about the ways that she has experienced shame as being a motivator or as being a corrector. And in my experience, it's hard for me to connect with that, because for the most part, when I've experienced shame or when I've seen shame in the folks that I've worked with, it oftentimes gets in the way of moving towards life worth living goals or in willingness to engage in change.
No, that's great. I mean, you're speaking to make it, topical, right? Like there's not a lot of dialectics in the social discourse when it comes to problematic behaviors. And a lot of individuals who come to DBT are there because their behaviors have gotten their lives to a point of suffering. So can we look at, we can go module by module, we can jump around, whatever you want to do, but how the modules of DBT build out this hopeful life worth living goals? Because, we have Marsha's story with her memoir. We saw how she built out her life worth living goals. And for those of you who haven't read Marsha Linehan's book, highly recommend it. It's so good. It's very validating and just illuminating to what human beings can and sometimes can't do. So Yeah, let's jump around, Jesse. How about what is it about these modules that speak to and build out these life worth living goals for the individual?
So I feel like emotion regulation is probably the module in which we focus the most on identifying both values and life worth living goals.
Mm-hmm.
And we can sort of discuss that distinction, but sort of to your point, like that is the module in which we are really taking the time to identify, okay, what is it that I'm moving towards? Now, I should preface that by saying, oftentimes when folks are engaging in comprehensive DBT treatment, the pre-treatment phase, meaning the very beginning, will involve identifying some of those life worth living
Yeah.
goals. And for the very reason that, you know, our goal in DBT isn't to stop you. Well, let me say this. Our goal in DBT is to keep you moving towards what's important to you.
Mm.
Like that is our primary goal. We want, and I was told to me by my mentor, Dr. Shreen Visby, who is mentored by Marsha Linehan, that like the most compassionate thing a therapist can do is help a client move towards their goals.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not like quote unquote a suicide stopping therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It is a life worth living therapy.
Ooh, wait, let's pause there
Yeah.
let's pause there for a second. First, people who asked about the title, it's called Building a Life Worth Living by Marsha Linehan. That's the title of the book. I love what you just said because so much of the way that mental illness and specifically suicidality is framed is as we just don't want you to kill yourself. Instead of what you just said, which I heard you say, what are you living for? My partner and I tell this story. We stayed at an Airbnb in Denver, and we said something. We were at grocery shopping, and this woman was amazing. She took us grocery shopping, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, these are to live for." And we're like, "What?" She was like, "Oh my gosh, these are my favorite cookies. They're to live for." And I was like, "Oh." She's like, "Yeah. Why would I say to die for? Like, I live for these cookies." And so we think about that framing all the time. So what specifically about the DBT ethos and the philosophy of these modules encourages what you just said, like what that is?
Well, like the question that we're often asking ourselves is like, are we, and this is maybe pulling a little bit from another therapy called ACT, but it's very much in line with DBT in this respect, is like the question is, what are we moving towards versus what are we moving away from?
Mm.
In other words, our goal in practicing these skills in, whether it's distress tolerance, whether it's emotion regulation or mindfulness, we want to hold in mind what is it that we're actually moving towards versus just stopping.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to stop a behavior,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's hard to tell ourselves, just stop thinking, just stop feeling that way. In fact, it's at times nearly impossible. So the question is, instead of just moving away or pushing away a behavior, we want to hold in mind, what are we actually replacing it with? What are we moving towards? What is the action that we're taking rather than avoiding?
That's amazing. And then, so I've often described DBT as the what and the how before you get into the why. Specifically because it gives you the skills, what to do, how to do them effectively, so you can tolerate the distress and the discomfort of your daily life and your suffering. Can you speak to how DBT is like a really great developer of skills so that you can go do some of that more deeper trauma informed work?
Yeah. So when Marsha was developing the treatment, she sort of identified various stages of a person's treatment. And so DBT, comprehensive DBT, the skills learning, is really understood to be targeting stage one. And the metaphor that she used here was that of a house. And stage one is almost like you are in the basement and you are living in just hell.
Yeah.
And the only way out of hell is through misery. It's going to be really tough. It's like the only way to climb out of that basement is by climbing a metal ladder, which metal in fire gets very hot and it's painful. And so our goal during this period of time is to tolerate some of that distress,
Mm-hmm.
begin to learn to habituate to some of those unwanted emotions,
Yeah,
and then really begin to, again, identify life worth living goals and move towards those things.
totally.
Now, to your point, once we have those baseline
Mm-hmm.
skills, then there's the second stage of DBT, which oftentimes is related to trauma treatment. And
Mm-hmm.
so there is, in fact, a trauma treatment informed by DBT called DBT prolonged exposure,
Mm-hmm.
which is oftentimes once folks sort of move from stage one to stage two and have developed a lot of those skills, are then really ready to look at, okay, what are the things in my life,
Yeah,
oftentimes forms of traumatic invalidation,
yeah.
that have increased my likelihood to experience suffering and dysregulation, and
Mm-hmm.
how do we target them?
Mm. I love that. Yeah, because as somebody who started with the why and dug in, and I was just talking with my therapist about how you can't read your way out of trauma, um, which is really challenging because you think like you'll pick up a book and it's about the exact same thing that you went through. You'll finish the book and you might feel valid and understood, and it's still there. So I had a really hard time shifting from don't do this to do this positive thing. Don't think this to think this positive thing, or don't let your thoughts be who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in a religious environment, you are your thoughts. You literally are your thoughts. You become the thing you think about. That was the language that was used. That was the way it was framed. Depending on certain circles and depending on certain beliefs, sometimes God can predict your thoughts before you have them, whatever it may be. Oh, and I want to encourage everybody who's watching to please ask questions. Jesse is an expert. He is here because he is an expert at DBT. He has extensive knowledge and experience. So if you have questions about anything from what the hell is DBT, how do I use it, if you heard us say something so far that you want more clarification on, please, 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 we will pause the live and answer your question. We are here as a support. The reason TheraHive exists is because DBT must be more accessible. It must be more available. And you don't have to have an emotionally dysregulated mental illness to benefit from the skills of DBT. And with that, I would love to ask, how does the we'll say common person who doesn't have a diagnosed mental illness, who is experiencing suffering, how might they employ the skills similarly or differently from somebody who's there because they are being disrupted by a mental illness?
So I will say, and I mentioned this earlier, like these are life living skills. I would say broadly, and I think
Yeah.
this is one of the real, I would say to some extent, like innovations of Marsha's work, is that efforts at avoiding emotional experiences, efforts to suppress emotion, to block it, to numb it, is oftentimes at the source of a lot of our suffering.
Yeah.
And that is if you have a diagnosable mental illness, that is if you're experiencing just run-of-the-mill anxiety or sadness or grief, is that we are not taught, and I'll be more specific, at least within the culture that I grew up in, I was not taught how to be with difficult emotion.
Yeah.
And so these skills are for anyone who wants to begin to find themselves in the driver's seat of their emotional experience rather than feel like they're being driven by those emotions, who wants to be willing to tolerate difficult emotions and to learn that they can be with those emotions and it won't destroy you.
Yeah.
I kind of
that.
believe that that's broadly for everyone.
Yeah. No, I agree. My question was almost like a trick question because it's like it's gonna be effective regardless, whoever you are. Are you able to see these questions, Jesse?
For some reason I can't. Oh
That's
wait.
okay.
Yeah, no, I
Okay,
can't. But
that's
please.
okay. I will read it. We have a question from Anaya Sameo, which I did my best. Hello, psychotic disorder / borderline personality here. How could these skills help me in like a nutshell?
In a nutshell. There's so many different types of skills that like when Marsha was developing the treatment, she was drawing from so many different other treatments and created this comprehensive thing that these skills, depending on, what you mentioned earlier, I just want to come back to this because I really I think even for folks who, for instance, experience psychotic disorders, the experience of taking our thoughts as both true and real can be such a source of suffering for folks.
Yeah.
And, there are plenty of skills in DBT where we are getting the distance between ourselves and our thoughts so that instead of fusing with them, instead of holding on to them, we have a bit more room to navigate. So broadly, in a nutshell, how can these skills be helpful? I'm trying to think of Stefan, what would you say? I'm trying to think of the one sentence.
I guess if I were to make a logline movie pitch about it, it would be in a world where everything seems to invalidate and make you feel stupid, small, and ashamed. DBT comes along to say, you're not your thoughts, you can do better, and it's okay to suffer. And you don't have to do it alone. It's a very practical and comprehensive lifeline. It will not save you from the ocean. It will gladly throw you a line. You just got to hold on. I think that's kind of was my experience with it.
Folks, I just want to bring attention to how Stefan just so expertly in that metaphor, in that movie trailer, wove both the acceptance and change end of it, which is, I think for folks with chronic mental illness or experiencing suffering, or even if you're not, oftentimes we are told by maybe it's our family, society, or culture that what we're thinking, feeling, or behaving is somehow quote unquote wrong. Sort of circling back to this idea of badness from our earlier part of our conversation. And one of the things, the principles that we hold on to in DBT is that one, all behavior is caused. We might not understand the cause, but all behavior is caused. And it is more effective to understand why a behavior happens than it is to blame yourself for having engaged in that behavior. So again, this acceptance of okay, I'm given what I know, given my upbringing, given my learning, I'm doing the best that I can. And as Stefan highlighted, I need to do better.
Yeah. Those of you who do follow this account know that I've had multiple experiences with suicidality, with rubbing up against that very scary reality and those very scary thoughts. And it's very frightening when your own brain is trying to pull the plug on your own life and your goals. And one thing that was very, probably the most potent thing about DBT for me was that it just, for every question I had about my behavior, it had an answer and it had an option. It didn't say this is your option. It said try this option, and if that doesn't work, try this option, and if that doesn't work, try this option. Probably the most impactful thing that has stuck with me is the non-judgmentalness, the you are not your thoughts, and the validation. I read Alan Frazzetti's book High Conflict Couple right after I finished my DBT program, and it blew my fucking mind. Validation continues to blow my mind. And for those of you who have not joined the Amanda Goddesy Book Club, we are going into the Nonviolent Communication book by Marshall B. Rosenberg, which continues to blow my mind. All of that to say, somebody, the initial question was in a nutshell, what could this be for me? That's totally going to be up to you. I can't know what your hell looks like. I just know that it's probably really hot and we can walk out of it together. I love that metaphor for Marcia, because the idea is if you reject reality and say I'm just going to be willful and I'm not going to this shouldn't be happening to me. This shouldn't be happening to me. It doesn't change the reality. And I want to be careful here though, because that is not to say that there are some realities that are just invariably suffering for suffering's sake. There seems to be no logical understanding of oh, you're there because of these people's behavior. It's something out of your control. And then I wanted to speak to this, Jesse. How does the life worth living goals work for somebody who is in a situation with very little power? We're talking kids, people with across the ability spectrum, people in warring countries, people in who are stranded on a boat, whatever it may be. How does it play out for somebody who doesn't have maybe as much power as we're inferring with ourselves?
I think that's a really important question. And I want to highlight that, DBT was created and developed by a person with a specific sort of gender and racial background for a population of mostly, cis white women.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are going to be limitations in terms of the skills, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I think broadly the principle is that, and this is where I actually think values are helpful.
Yeah.
And we begin to think differently between goals and values.
Yeah.
Values are the way that we want to show up in life.
Mm-hmm.
You can't ever achieve a value.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like some of my values are, like service. Some of my values are creativity and curiosity. Now, there are an infinite number of ways for me to find goalposts along that path towards those
Yeah.
values. Currently, it looks like being a therapist, having this conversation with you.
Yeah.
And who knows what could happen in my life. And the idea is that, yes, like pain is going to come my way. There's
Yeah.
likely going to be a block that suddenly, a boulder that sits in front of me on this path that I've imagined.
Yeah.
And if I know the general direction that I'm headed,
Yeah.
okay, then I'm going to have to create a new path. Now, I don't want to oversimplify this and say that for some people who are experiencing intense trauma and suffering, I don't even know if in this moment I don't know how helpful it would be to remind them of like, okay, they're like, it's in some cases, it is just about getting through this moment of hell. And I will say from my own personal experience, it is also important to remind myself like, okay, if the worst happens, there's still something I'm working towards.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, we're alluding to some radical acceptance too. And just to remind everybody, if anything we're saying rings true to you, we loved that first question. That was a great question. So if anybody else has specific questions about how DBT shows up, how it can show up, maybe if you're going through something specific or if there's something you'd like to see an example of, we would happily walk through that. When I know that when I'm developing, life worth living goals, in order to get to values, it can be helpful to understand who you are. And so what is it about developing the values within the DBT framework that can assist in a person kind of understanding who am I, right? Like what's my capacity? I know for me, learning boundaries, like the interpersonal effectiveness skills was huge for me, just for being able to ask for and say no to things. And that gave an element of identity, because if you're constantly people pleasing, who are you when you're not? So can we kind of speak to what DBT can do to help a person develop these?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. When Marcia was developing the treatment, she identified dysregulation taking place at various different levels.
Okay.
And so like cognitive dysregulation, emotion dysregulation, and she also identified identity dysregulation.
Yeah.
And if we think about the biosocial, I'm going to get like a little bit, but if we think about the biosocial theory, the idea here is that there are folks for whom they experience emotional vulnerability. They experience really intense emotions that may last for long periods of time, and it takes a while for them to go to baseline.
Yeah.
And then that interacts or transacts with an environment that's constantly telling them that what they're thinking, what they're feeling, how they're behaving is wrong.
Yeah.
And so when you're constantly experiencing that chronic invalidation, it makes complete sense that it is hard to know yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's almost shameful.
Right.
Who we are is so connected to our emotions. And if you're constantly being told that what you're feeling is bad, then how are you supposed to find that inherent wisdom? How are you supposed to access wise mind?
Yeah.
So I just want to validate, for many folks with emotion dysregulation, it is like identity confusion and identifying values is a struggle. Now, Stefan, to your point, when we begin to at times turn the temperature or learn to regulate those emotions more effectively, when we begin to set limits with our environment and learn to be more assertive, we can then begin to sort of shape an environment for ourselves in which we can be a bit more validating and accepting of our emotions, thereby giving us a bit more insight to what's important to
Yeah.
us. When we're willing to listen to what we're feeling, that can be a very helpful guide towards identifying our life worth living goals.
Yeah. How can that was great, Jesse. Thank you for saying that. And just to remind everybody, if anything we're saying sparks a thought or a curious question you want to ask, or a judgmental question, we're not scared of those either. Please, just anything that we can add clarity to, we would love to. In a perfect world, the skills are implemented at a very early age that people learn to regulate these emotions on a day-to-day basis. In our current cultural context, that's not really what we're seeing, and that's okay. I'm hopeful that there's still time and space for that to change. I would like to take a bit of a binary extreme example here and say, let's take the generic term of a survivor of abuse and the generic term of an abuser.
Mm-hmm.
How does DBT, because I'd like to show just the breadth of what DBT can do. How does DBT show up for both of those people who have experienced very different types of traumas?
So like if we're looking at both the person who has perpetuated harm to others or hurt others, as well as the person who has been subject to harm, and how is DBT effective?
Yeah.
So I'll say a couple things. I think one, broadly, those individual experiences those are experiences that may look very differently depending on the individual.
Yeah.
I think broadly, when we're looking at someone that is hurting someone else, the most important thing at first is to stop them from doing that, and to get them to be engaging in more effective behaviors.
Yeah.
And so again, skills from distress tolerance. If someone is hurting someone because they're at an 8, 9, or 10 in their sort of emotion from 0 to 10, and they're having difficulty thinking clearly, accessing wise mind, then we have to use skills to bring them down.
Totally.
I will also say that, a lot of mindfulness skills and radical acceptance oftentimes comes in because folks who tend to abuse tend to experience a lot of shame and self-judgment or judgment of others. And again, that judgment only intensifies dysregulation. So that's when you draw a lot from mindfulness.
Yeah.
Now, when you're the subject, when you are the person who's being abused, well, what I will also say here is that, the question is, in some cases, we have to leave a situation.
Yeah.
We have to set limits with our environment, or we have to say no, in which case interpersonal effectiveness skills becomes really important.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of self-validation that happens. I think for a lot of folks who have been the subject of abuse, it's like we have such difficulty understanding why that pain was delivered to us. And I've, in folks that I've worked with in trauma treatment, our brain really wants to make sense of this anomalous thing. Why did this person hurt me? And oftentimes there's a lot of shame. There's oftentimes a thought like, oh, what is it about me that made me the target of this abuse? Why did I invite this? And so again, we are looking in a lot of ways to begin to introduce self-compassion, validation, and acceptance that this did happen, and it's terrible, and it sucks, and it's painful, and that doesn't mean that you caused it to happen.
Totally. I love that. And that goes right into, somebody asked a very awesome question. Leinstenbeck said, hi, can you please explain the skill radical acceptance?
Radical acceptance. It is a toughie and a goodie. Stefan, do you want to go for it first, or would you like
Sure,
me? Whatever.
I'll do my best, and then you come in and save me. So to my understanding of radical acceptance is it's part of the acceptance part of DBT, the DBT modules, and basically what we were speaking to earlier, right? Like when you find yourself in a metaphorical hell, by denying the reality that you are in hell, you are only turning up the heat, and you're not doing anything to make it go away. You're not changing anything. By radically accepting that you are in this quote unquote hell, now that you know where you are, you're not fighting reality. You can look around and look for that ladder we were talking about. You can get out. So to my knowledge, radical acceptance is a very powerful tool to bring you back to the present so you can move forward.
I love that. I love that.
Great.
I mean, I will only build on that in that sometimes it's easier to also know what it is. Radical acceptance is when you're not accepting. So we have like this handy formula that suffering equals resistance times pain. And the idea here is that all of us are going to have experienced, or maybe currently experience pain. That can be emotional pain, physical pain, any sort of pain. That is a universal human experience. Now, how we relate to that pain determines the extent of our suffering. And there's this Buddhist metaphor of the two arrows. So it's like someone's walking down and they get shot by an arrow. And they're like, ouch. And all of a sudden, they may have the urge to be like, who shot that arrow at me? And all of a sudden, they're filled with rage and they're screaming at the world. Or they might be like, oh, what's wrong with me that I got shot by an arrow? And that is inacceptance. That's an unwillingness to tolerate, acknowledge that that first arrow is there and that it's painful. So radical acceptance oftentimes fully, body, mind, if you believe in a soul, being with this present moment, softening to it, and allowing whatever emotions to come up to be there. And this is where it gets really radical, to love those emotions, to offer yourself the compassion that what is happening is true for you in this moment.
The idea of loving your emotions, very challenging concept for a number of reasons. What is it about loving your emotions that can be so effective when you're building out your life worth living goals?
I think so carrying it back to when we were talking about like this idea of identity dysregulation. Like our emotions are crucial forms of information to help us understand what's important to us. And if we are, to some extent, emotion phobic, if we are unwilling to experience shame, anger, sadness, fear, then we are not taking in critical pieces of information. And let me just highlight, I rarely meet folks who are able to dampen just those emotions and then don't experience a dampening of other emotions, or who don't swing from one to the other. And so what I will say is loving our emotions is a step towards accepting them without judgment, without trying to reject them, and then processing that information so that we can have a sense of, okay, what is this pain telling me? What is this pain telling me about what's important to me? Because oftentimes on the flip side of our pain is what's important. The only things that are painful to me are the things that are important to me in a lot of ways.
Just kidding. Apparently Instagram thought that was a great idea.
I don't know what that. I was like, all of a sudden, I was like, I got some sort of notification that reactions are happening.
Okay, I want to. Also, do I have you? How long do I have you for, Jesse? Until 1 o'clock my time, 4 o'clock your time?
Yes.
Okay. Oh yeah, duh. We have team console.
wait. Our team console is not so. Wait, but that's a couple hours.
No. Because 4 o'clock my time. Sorry. My bad. I want to reframe having life worth living goals, and I want to put it in the perspective of a caregiver. So if somebody is a parent or a caregiver of somebody who has emotion dysregulation, maybe a disruptive mental illness, whatever it may be, and let's say that they are wrestling with what it is that their child will be able to do in life, and knowing what life looks like, what the suffering might entail. How do parents or caregivers who are trying their best using the DBT skills, how do they employ the life worth living idea for something that is essentially going to kind of be out of their control as their child gets older and moves on or continues in the behaviors and is really, really challenging? Like, essentially, I'm asking, how do parents and caregivers use the life worth living goals, the model, to keep them from burning out so that they can keep showing up for the person that needs their support?
That is a really great question because, and actually, I want to. You mentioned Alan Frazzetti a moment ago. For folks who have loved ones with severe mental illness or with, who have been diagnosed with BPD, I highly recommend checking out NEABPD. I think it's .org, maybe .com. Basically, they host throughout the country and maybe throughout the world something called Family Connections, which is a free skills group for loved ones of those with BPD. And that's been a lot of work that Alan Frazzetti has done. So, here's what I will say, is that the concept of burnout in my mind is that, like we have, and I take this, I'm using this metaphor from this neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett, but I find it's helpful. It's like our body has a budget, okay? It's like we've got like a certain amount of energy that we can use towards anything. And when we're running a deficit, it can look like exhaustion, tiredness. That's oftentimes when emotion mind comes in. Any person who's didn't sleep in that night and then woke up in the morning and found that they were grouchy, well, that's running at a deficit. Now we know that there are things that help provide us with deposits. And in DBT, we think of these things in our ABC Please set of skills. So that's accumulating positives, that's building mastery, and that's what we would call sort of our general self-care, our please skills. Those are the skills that we practice to ensure that we are running at a surplus. And so here's what I'll say. If you are a caregiver or a parent, one of the things that you have to hold in mind is your capacity to access wise mind. The capacity, the ability to access both your emotions and reason. And to do that, you can't be running at a deficit. It's really hard. And so having your own life worth living goals means that you have mastery experiences, you have positive experiences that you are moving towards. You are increasing your own sense of self-efficacy so that while other aspects of your life may feel completely out of control, you are having an experience of empowerment in other aspects. So you are not completely drained.
I love that. As we approach the the closing here, I'd love to know what it's been like, for you to build out your own life worth living goals. Like, as you are you're not just a student, you're a clinician, you have experience and you're teaching it. So what is it like for you to develop? Because I'm assuming they evolve, right? Like as time goes on.
They totally evolve. So here's what I will say. Like I went back to school a little later in life. I'm what they call like a late career changer. And at that time, like prior to going to psychology, I don't think service was ever like I never did values. Like I never recognized value. Like it was not a thing that was top of mind for me. And for most of my sort of young adult life, I experienced a lot of envy, a lot of regret, a lot of dissatisfaction and resentment. I guess a lot of like reality inacceptance. And it wasn't until I went back to school when I recognized how meaningful it was for me to connect with other people in this way and to be of some service that I realized, and I feel very fortunate this way because it wasn't a life worth living goal that I identified, but I was like, this is a life worth living goal for me. This is a value for me. And what has been really interesting to see is how aligning myself with that value and identifying goals, like for instance, increasing my knowledge as a clinician, working with folks who have different, sort of complex issues that they're trying to figure
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
How, as I move towards that, I feel more self-assured in my own life. I feel more content and more willing to accept
Yeah.
reality. So
Yeah.
there's like a bit of like I don't know, there's like a back and forth there. Like the more I move on this path, the more willing I'm to accept reality, the more willing I'm able to accept reality, the more clear my life worth living goals are.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Jesse, where can we find you? Where can they find me? Where can they find us? Where
Where can
are
they
we?
find us? Where can they find us? So they can first find us at therahive.com. We have both our full DBT skills groups. We've got coaching. We also have an advanced DBT skills group. So if you're someone that has done all the modules and you're like, I wanna really practice them, that's also another great opportunity. We're getting ready to launch our adolescent DBT skills group, which I'm very excited
Yeah.
about. Outside of that, there's TheraHive Instagram, of which I'm on. You can also find me on my personal Instagram, Talk is Good. Yeah, Stefan, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me here on A Manic Odyssey, either Instagram, TikTok, or the tube of you. Or they can find me at TheraHive, where I'm currently leading groups on Tuesday and Thursdays. As more people come to TheraHive, we can, of course, build out more availability, but we would love to have you. It is honestly such a joy to be able to teach the skills and experience people learning them. It is truly a great environment to come and learn these skills. And I say that as somebody who has been through 2 DBT programs and now has the fortunate pleasure of being at TheraHive. TheraHive is doing the thing that I was looking for a number of reasons. And so it's great. It's great to be there.
And can I just say, I just want to let folks know listening, like just how lucky we are to have you.
Oh,
I
thanks.
and like, I think one of the big messages is that like, I think oftentimes there can be this feeling that like, oh, the people teaching you this thing, like they've got it figured and like they're just going to pass you these skills. It's like, no, it's like we're all walking through life. Like
Yeah.
we're all figuring it out together. Some of
Yeah.
us may have learned these skills. And I think, Stefan, for you to communicate these skills from this like this authentic lived experience, I think it's so meaningful and so meaningful to really help get people excited and interested in DBT. So I just really appreciate you.
Thank you, Jesse. I received that. I received that validation. Well, that's it, folks. Thank you so much. We will do more of these. There is so much more to talk about that we did not touch on, and we appreciate everybody who asked a question. For those of you who didn't, no worries. Keep your questions. You can always DM me. You can DM Jesse. You can DM TheraHive. We'd be more than willing to answer your questions if we're capable, and direct you to somebody who can if we're not. So, Jesse, thank you so much, and I will see
Thank
you
you.
in a few
I'll see
hours.
you in a few hours.
Okay.
Cool. Bye,
Bye-bye.
folks.